been a couple of years since we've been able to learn together in person. So over time, I've been doing a series that I've been calling Mystery Midrash. And tonight's class is called Who Entered Paradise Alive? Can everybody hear me? I'll try to speak more loudly if you need it. Okay. And in the past classes, what I called Mystery Midrash, there was a problem to solve, a question to try to answer. We examined the textual evidence and we came to some conclusions. Not always, but we could show our evidence and solve our mystery. This series of Mystery Midrash, we are in the realm of mystery. That is, we are dealing with things that are beyond the rational, requiring imagination and perhaps faith in the broadest sense. I assume that there would be a little bit of overlap between the three topics that I set up for this series. Although it turns out there's a lot more overlap than I had realized. I came up with the titles and then discovered that the topics were much different than I anticipated. So in 2 weeks, we're gonna look at the mystery of what happened to the Garden of Eden after Adam and Chava were thrown out of it. And then I think 4 weeks, sometime in December, we're going to learn a little bit about the Bat Kol. Bat Kol is a voice from heaven, although not probably the divine voice, although we'll find out. So we're talking a lot about crossing boundaries that aren't normally crossed. So let's see where we are. Okay. So I enjoy these kinds of topics, and Ellie and I always have this debate about the validity of Midrash or something like that, but I enjoy the playfulness of Midrash, but at the same time, Midrash is profound. And the questions, particularly that are being asked by these classes, which are really questions maybe of life, certainly of death, but again of those boundaries, those are profound theological questions, and we'll see what happens. I'm actually really excited that we have the Minsk Shabbaton has been scheduled first week in December. And our speaker, who I have no idea who he is, but he's working on a PhD in Midrash at JTS. So I'm looking forward to learning with him and hopefully getting some of the newest learning about Midrash. The things that we're going to be looking at tonight are not things that any of us, I think most of us, learned in Hebrew school, if we went to Hebrew school, although some of the names, some of the things may ring a bell. They're not even, for the most part, things that I learned in rabbinical school. And for all the teaching that I've done about pieces of Midrash, I found myself going a lot of places in preparing this class that I haven't. So for the most part, I've been using traditional midrashim, kind of standard collections. Although for this class, we're going to work with some later collections than I often work with. But I've also found myself looking at texts that are not necessarily rabbinic, but they are Jewish literature from the Second Temple period and a little bit later than that. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever looked on the shelves here. 3 volumes, this size, called Outside of the Bible, Ancient Jewish Writings Related to Scripture. And, I'm not somebody who really does psychedelics or anything, but if you read these books, you will not need to. Because the imagination of our ancestors 2,000 years ago and the kinds of questions that they were asking and answers that they were coming up with, at least in some communities, are really interesting. This is diverse material, that it is Jewish thinking, but some of it has been rejected by rabbinic Judaism. Some of it was simply lost over time, because remember, they were working with manuscripts. And if you lost the only copy anybody had, or it went to another community, then you lost the text. Unless it had been recorded when somebody else was writing something and said, by the way, in that book, right, I heard this story. Some of it was translated, some of it was written in Hebrew, some of it was written in Aramaic, some of it was written in Greek, but some of it, many of these things were preserved in Greek or Latin and not in the Jewish languages. And one of the texts we're going to bump into tonight was preserved not in Greek. It was written originally in Aramaic, but not in Greek and not in Latin, although pieces of it were. The entire thing was preserved in Ge'ez. You know what Ge'ez? What language is that?
It's the Ethiopian.
It's the Ethiopian language. And so the book we're gonna get a tiny taste of, was translated into Ge'ez in Ethiopia, which is where one of the oldest Christian churches went. And they preserved this text, and it became very important in their theology. And we only found it, but it turns out it's a text that was really, really important and really popular in the in the first century, second century. So we're going a lot of places. Some of these texts have been recovered by modern scholars. Some of them were found by medieval scholars. For example, Josephus was, wrote about Jewish history. He was kind of lost and not known for a couple of 100 years. And then he was translated into Hebrew in a text called Yosifon, which is a Jewish translation of Josephus, who was an important historian of the Second Temple period. Some of the things were saved by the Catholic Church in the Apocrypha, which is found in the Catholic Bible. And it's where a lot of our books that were our books are found, and we're not even sure that we don't even realize that they're our books. Okay, I'm going too far off, because what I can tell you is this piece of it has certainly been my rabbit hole for this particular class. I came to this topic from learning and teaching about two of my favorite characters, and any of you who have studied with me know that I love to teach about Serach bat Asher and Bitya bat Paro, or Batya bat Paro. And both of those characters exist only in a tiny, tiny place in the Torah. So Serach bat Asher is granddaughter of Jacob. Her name appears 3 times in the Torah, and from that name, that set of names, the rabbis created this incredible character. And the same with Batya, that's the name the rabbis give Bat Paro, the daughter of Paro, who saved Moshe. And they created an entire personality, an entire world around just a couple of verses at the beginning of Exodus. And what's interesting is these 2 women are the only 2 women who fit this category of those who entered paradise alive. Okay, so that's really where I met this concept that there are 7 or 9 or 11 or 13 or more people who entered paradise alive, or who never tasted death. We're going to look at those different phrases. I made the title originally 10 who entered paradise alive. That's a number that doesn't appear in any of the collections. It's every other number but 10. But 10 is always a good number. So it was really, I came to this class from curiosity because I'd seen the other lists. Sometimes when I was trying to research the end of my classes about both Serach and Batya. Okay, so that's how I got to that. But so before we look at the handouts, I'll give you the handouts in a minute. It's a strange concept, right? Those who entered paradise alive, or those who never died. But you probably know and can think of maybe a couple of people who fit that category. So who can you think of that entered heaven alive, never died? I mean, again, so Sam, give me one.
Probably the one that we all were familiar with is Elijah.
Oh,
I'm rereading Matt, Daniel Matt's book.
Okay, right, so and Danny Matt's book I didn't bring with us, but his important book on oh, is it right there? Oh, somewhere. It's in our library, and he just wrote it. He spoke about it about a year or two ago. Okay, so Elijah is the one we know, and in some ways the model, right? How did Elijah get to heaven? Fiery chariot. So that's one model. And we'll look at that text. We're actually going to spend a little more time on Elijah than I had expected, because he's a little more interesting. Although even the biblical text itself is kind of interesting. Who else? Anybody else you can think of? Any Talmudic stories? Who's it? Okay, so Yaakov, why would you say that?
With all the other ancestors who died, he uses the words very literally by Yamot. He died, and the Torah does not records his death, but it doesn't say the verb that he died.
Right. Okay, and we're going to see whether or not that verb is important. We'll see if he's on any of the lists. Anybody else? Think of some Talmudic stories. Think of the major character in the Torah. Takes up 4 books. Okay, so he died, but he went to heaven. So let's see where he went up to heaven, maybe. And then he came back down, right? He brought us the Torah, and then he went back up again. So the question of what does it mean to go to heaven alive, or go to Gan Eden alive, or do you have to die first? We're going to see what the categories are. Other people you can think of. Some of you may know a famous story of 4 sages. Anybody? So Jonathan, I see you smiling. What's
The 4 sages would enter Pardes. He worked in paradise, and they only Akiva is the one to come back with his sanity intact, and the others either become heretics or die.
Right. So we have stories, more stories than you realize, of people going up to heaven. Bodily visions, we don't know. So just kind of putting that out there. And all right, so I'm going to give out the material. Actually, I'll start passing this out. Might need to ask a couple of people to share, but all right, so my plan for the class tonight, trying to watch the clock, is that we're going to quickly read the listings found in 4 different midrashic collections, and see who's on the list, and if we can learn anything from that, who's in and who's out of these lists altogether. Okay, then we're going to look at a few of the variations on, or a few of the justifications for why a particular person might have this. It's seen, by the way, I think, as a good thing. Okay, the texts are saying it's a reward. It's a good thing to go to heaven without dying, and we'll come back to what we're supposed to think about that soon. We're going to actually focus on 2 characters, the 2 obvious Torah characters, Enoch and Elijah a little bit, who possibly explicitly did not die like mortals, and what happened to them, because that's where some of the really most interesting things happen. And finally, I want to make sure to leave time to ask what are the commonalities, what are the things we're supposed to learn from these collections, and what do we do with them? Okay, so we're trying to cover a whole lot. I thought before I started really looking at the material, I thought that what we would do is look at the characters who show up in these lists and figure out who they are and why they're there. The problem is I could teach, it turns out, a class on almost all of them. Some of the minor characters that you never heard of, I never heard of, and we could figure them out, but we're not going to spend a lot of time. So that's where we're going to go in the next less than an hour. So we're starting the collection. This is this idea that X number of people went to heaven without dying or never tasted death, or we're going to see a few other variations on that. The idea seems to be earlier, but they show up in these midrashim, these collections are relatively late. So classic rabbinic midrashim, we talk about modern midrash today, people are still writing midrash because midrash is how you explain the texts of the Bible. How do you explain them? What do they mean? I have another set, Joanna, if you need it. I'll just put that up. So they come from about 100 to 200 before the Common Era. So they start this idea of midrash where you explain the text of the Bible and you try to say, why is it meaningful? What does it mean? It starts about 100, 200 before the Common Era and goes into the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th century. And there are different styles of midrashim and different collections. And they build on each other. They take older material, they rework it. And every once in a while, they throw something that's really new in, or they connect things that weren't connected before. So the first midrash we're going to look at, the first collection is called Yalkut Shimoni. And it's thought to come from around 13th century in Ashkenaz. There's material there that's as early as the 11th century, but it doesn't really become popular until the 15th century because has over 1,000 midrashim in it. It is the most complete collection of midrashim for the entire Bible. So it covers everything. But here, actually, this shows up in the section under Noah, which is kind of interesting. I'm going to go around. Helene, do you mind just reading the first Yalkut Shimoni, just the English?
This very beginning, right? Okay. 13 never tasted the taint of death, and they are Enoch, Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, Methuselah, Hiram, the king of Tyre, Ebed Melech, the Cushite, Bachia, the daughter of Pharaoh, Serach, Bat Asher, as well as the three sons of Korah, and Eliahu, Mashiach, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. 9 entered the garden of Eden Manara, Enoch, Eliahu, Mashiach, Eliezer, Ebed Melech the Cushite, Hiram the king of Tyre, and Yachaves, the son of Rabbi Yehuda the prince, and Serach Bat Asher, and Bachia, the daughter of Pharaoh. Some say we replace Hiram with Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi.
Okay. So what do we see in this text, and who are some of the people? Who's familiar to you? Eliezer. We already met Eliezer, although we didn't really know. No, we did. He had his name earlier. Yeah, we met him earlier. He's Eliezer. This time he's the servant of Abraham. But he's the star of our parsha this week, so it's really nice that it works out. Who else have you heard of?
I think Hiram was the time of Solomon.
Okay, also David, by the way, he was friends with David first, and then he
David.
became friends with Solomon.
Which is
and
interesting that he's not necessarily Jewish
Good, okay.
or Israelite.
What do you know about Methuselah?
He's mentioned in a genealogy.
Uh-huh.
His extremely advanced age.
Right.
And I recognize also, but I have less of an
Okay.
association with them.
Okay, who else? I'm sorry? Well, the three sons of Korah, right? Because what happened to Korah? Got swallowed, but I wasn't gonna give all these details, okay? But a couple of parshiot after the point that everybody who belonged to Korah apparently got swallowed, we learned that the sons of Korah didn't die. Okay, which is the key here. And there are some beautiful psalms, a couple of beautiful psalms, I think 3, including one for one of the days of the week, which are Livnei Korah. So that's the hook on which that tradition comes from. Okay, anyone else here who's surprising?
Never heard of Eved Melech Hushai.
Okay, so you never heard, I'm going to assume that most of us have never heard of Eved Melech. That is maybe the servant of the king of, who was a Cushite. He's tops on everybody's list, right? Okay.
Batya is also interesting.
Right, so I said at the beginning, Batya and Serach are the 2 women, and they appear of every list that you're ever gonna see.
Which is Hushai, which Melech is Hushai.
Oh, good. Keep that in your mind, in your head, okay?
Servant of God?
So is it the servant of the king of the Cushites, or is it a guy whose name is Eved Melech, and he was a Cushite? Okay, all right,
One thing that struck me was the son of Rabbi Yehuda.
okay, so
It's not Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, it's his son, whom in my one never. And I assume he had kids, but
yeah,
why
well,
this specific?
good, we'll come back to that, okay.
last one.
Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, if you know any Talmudic folk tales, he's a really popular, kind, wonderful, important Talmudic rabbi. I have his story in here a little bit. Okay, this one thing there that should be a little surprising to you. Good. Okay. What in the world is the Mashiach doing on this list, right? It is a category. But he didn't die, right? Okay, so that's why I brought the
wasn't born.
book. That's why I brought the book over there, called. Can you read the title?
The Jewish Gospel, the story of the Jewish Christ.
Right. Okay. So I don't want to go into. I don't have time. I don't want to go a whole lot into this question of what's the Mashiach doing as someone who lived and then went up to heaven, and. Okay, although one argument that's made is this is a polemic against Christianity, because our Mashiach isn't dead, yours died. And that becomes, right, and that becomes a very, and remember, this is a late Midrash coming from Ashkenaz, although the tradition that the Mashiach is up in Gan Eden is a much older one. One of the texts here, and the question is, the question that Boyarin really deals with, that comes from a lot of these contemporary books, is Christianity. Jesus showed up at a time where he fit right into a pattern that already existed based on all of the writing around the time period. So that's where that book comes from. But the question of what the Messiah is doing up there, does the Messiah belong in these lists? But the Messiah shows up in a lot of lists. Okay, so you got a basic idea. And we have 2 categories of people here, right? What are the two categories? Because it's not the same number.
People who died and people who entered heaven a lot.
Right, so we
We
have
have never died. And people-
We have 13 who never tasted the taste of death. Not sure. But that's gonna be a phrase, the phrase in Hebrew, shalo tamotam mita. Okay, and then we have the other phrase that I used for the title, nichnasu b'chayim l'gan Eden, who went alive into the Garden of Eden. Are they different things? Are they not different things? All the people, I think, on the list here who entered Gan Eden, I think are in the list that, no, they're different. Okay, and that's one of the things that's gonna make us crazy. If I was a different rabbi in this shul, I would have made a chart, right? And we could see that, but you'll see it anyway, okay? Before we get, Midrash Kala Rabati is a tractate, a late tractate that's appended to the end of Seder Nezikim. So if you had one of those sets of Gemaras, sets of Talmuds there, and you went to the end of the section called damages, you would find a whole bunch of what are called minor tractates. Some of which are in the form of Talmud, some of which aren't. So Kala Rabati is there. The question there is it as early as the 3rd century? Probably it's more Gaonic in the 7th, 8th, 9th century in Babylonia. Whatever it is, for the moment, we're gonna look at the text. And although we're not gonna really go too far into this, as long as it was connected here, there was a Braita teaching that 7 patriarchs died in universal honor, and the worms and maggots had no power over them. Right, so that's a statement, and a couple of those people we thought might be on our list, right? But there's a group of people whose bodies died, but in fact the bodies are still extant. Okay, as opposed to most of us that eventually the worms and maggots are going to get us, and we're going to see 2 different lists of those as well. But I want to pick up, Barbara, if you don't mind, can you pick up where it says 7 entered paradise in their lifetime?
7 entered paradise in their lifetime.
Mhm.
Sarah, the daughter of Asher, Bathia, the daughter of Pharaoh, Hiram, king of Tyre, Ebed Melech, the Ethiopian, Eliezer, servant of Abraham, grandson of Yehuda, the prince, Jabez, and son Ed, Rabbi Yehush, Joshua ben Levi.
Okay, so we have there most of the same names. Sam, you noticed what's this, what's this Yavet, son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi? What does it show up? What shows up here in this list?
Grandson.
Right, the grandson of Judah the prince, and a comma, Jabez, somebody else, is not the grandson of Yehuda Nasi. None of them make that much sense to us, but that's okay. Okay? Oh, good. That was one of the questions I was gonna work on in the test. We'll see. Okay, so what you have on page 2, if you flip to page 2 in the beginning of page 3, is that you have discussions in this particular, explication. They're telling us who some of these characters are and proof text as to why they are in this category or that they are in this category. Okay, we're gonna skip that for now, and maybe come back to it. And starting on page 3, in the middle of the page, we're working with yet another late Midrashic collection called Derech Eretz Zutra. And Derech Eretz means like how you should behave. So for the most part, it's a collection of sort of good behavior for scholars. But in the middle of that, there's this little separate piece or part of it about we have a statement about the patriarchs and others who went to their rest with great honor, and worms and maggots don't have dominion over them. And it's a similar list, although interestingly, Miriam is added to that list. Okay. But then if you go below, Joan, do you mind reading where it says there were 9 who entered the Garden of Eden alive?
There were 9 who entered the Garden of Eden alive. Enoch, the son of Yered, Elijah, the Messiah, Elijah, the Messiah, Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, Hiram, king of Tyre, Ebed Melech, the Cushite, Jabez, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, the prince,
Now he's back in that position, okay?
Vidya, the daughter of Pharaoh, and Sarah, the daughter of Asher. Some say also Rabbi Joshua ben.
Okay, so now we've got 9. It's a pretty similar list, but a couple of changes. And if you flip to page 4, we have another book. I love the title of the collection in which I found this, although it's also in here. Is called Rabbinic Fantasies. I have most of the secondary sources on the last page. So this is from a collection called The Alphabet of Ben Sira. Ben Sira was apparently some kind of a scholar, a sage, who's found in the Apocrypha and some other places. He's early, and he's the wisdom. So he's a lot of proverbs, a lot of those kind of things. The Alphabet of Ben Sira actually is a late, it's a Gaonic piece, probably written, unusual for some of these texts, written clearly by one author. It's got one guy in his head. He created this work. It's narrative satirical. You don't always hear that description in this kind of Jewish literature. And it's the earliest and complicated Hebrew stories of the Middle Ages. The guy was probably an anarchist, and he ridicules all religious institutions of his time. So you're not going to see it too much in this section, but in case you're looking for something interesting to read, look for the Alphabet of Ben Sira. And the 2 sections of the book are built around the Aleph Bet, and either a story or a statement for each letter of the Aleph Bet. So let's see. Do you mind reading, starting with why does the angel of death? What's that?
He also does not really understand it.
Okay, can you read the next paragraph as well, please?
Who was this person? Now, the daughter of my son. This one, the daughter of the living Elijah, the servant of faith. Even the Ethiopian, the servant of God, the very God, all the children of
Okay, so we have, again, something related to Rabbi, where is he? To Rabbi Judah Hanasi, except this time it's the servant, and not a son. So we still get Jabez as a second person, and we have a new name and a new character. We get the bird. Okay. And so in some lists of those who entered paradise, the bird is actually found less in the category of those who entered paradise alive and more in the category of those who never tasted death. Okay. And I'm not going to tell you the whole story. You have it in here. One story. It may be kind of a phoenix. In that tradition of the phoenix bird, but it's also going to relate a little bit to the Garden of Eden, which is why I don't want to give it totally away. And we have a name, Jonadab. and Jonadab's children. Okay, good, don't know. I mean, I do know, but, I wanna be sure that we get somewhere else. Okay, so those are the four classic collections, but you'll find these repeated, you'll find the tradition that there were some group of people who entered paradise alive. But exactly who they were besides that basic five, changes. Now, sometimes when midrashim change, it's because they have a different purpose. So one of the classic examples is that there are four reasons why the children of Israel were rescued from Egypt. Okay, that's a classic statement in rabbinic literature, but what the four reasons are changes in different Jewish historical periods. They changed their name or they didn't change their name. What was important? They kept their language, or was Hebrew not so important? So that wasn't one of the reasons that they changed, okay? I'm not sure that in this kind of material, there's that much significance to who's in and who's out of the particular numbered lists, but we have this tradition. And one of the questions is what do we do with it? And we'll think about that as we get to the end. Any questions right now before we take a couple minutes to look at some of the writings and differences on the characters?
Is Gan Eden, Paradise, Shamayim, the same?
Good, come back next week. Come back in 2 weeks, actually, it's when that's my topic. But it's a good question, okay? Because one of the questions we're gonna ask is Gan Eden, and Gan Eden, actually, we get both paradise, some of the Hebrew is Gan Eden, some of the Hebrew here is Pardes. Is it in this world, or is it in heaven, right? We talked about the question of whether Moshe went to heaven or not. And there is certainly a strain of tradition, an early tradition that says Moshe got this close and God came this close. But even when Moshe went up to get the Torah, he didn't break that boundary, okay? Although we also have lots of other traditions that he did, and he went up to heaven, and the angels got mad and wanted to send him out, and God said, no, you can't send him out, right? So we have, that's a long way of saying, we'll touch on a little bit of that more, but I don't have a great answer. And what are they doing up there? We'll have one taste of that from about the women that I'll give you at the end if we have a chance. But all we knew is they somehow got there, okay? I think so let me just give you one example. I'm not going to give you all of the characters. I've labeled them on the sheets in the two long midrashim. The alphabet of Ben Sira gives you kind of something about each of the characters and why they're there, and also the Kala Rabati. Sorry. So if we look at Eliezer, so look on page 2. Let's flip over page 2 at the bottom, right? It said near the bottom on page 2, which you can't see because the beautiful staples in there. Why did Eliezer enter paradise alive? Because he prayed on Abraham's behalf. On what occasion? When he said, O Lord God of my master Abraham, send me, I pray thee, good speed this day. Okay, and then he reports in the Aliyah that I'm reading, the 4th Aliyah, on Shabbos, because the Lord sent me good speed. Okay, so that's very nice. Eliezer prayed on behalf of Abraham. What's the only catch you have with this text? Or with this person? Anybody here ever pray for anybody else? And do you expect to go up to paradise alive? I don't know. But it's a nice teaching.
Is there a detached that he's not Jewish?
Good, so
That
you already,
the status-
you already pointed out that we have Ebed, Ebed Melech Hushaitz, we got a non-Jew. Eliezer, was he Jewish, wasn't he Jewish, and Charam, okay, just heard the question. Bacha, maybe yes, maybe no, okay, so let's look at the alphabet of Ben Sira on page 4. And on the left side, Eliezer, so it's the second character on the left side. Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, is the son of Ham, who was Noah's son. Okay, so one of the things we know about midrashim is, and the rabbis don't like extra characters. Okay, so they often will try to connect one person to another person. And the other thing I didn't say at the beginning, but the other place that the rabbis get a lot of names and connections is the books of Chronicles. So they'll pull people out of Chronicles, which is where Jabez is, by the way. And they make stories out of them and they connect characters. But so Eliezer was the son of Ham, the grandson of Noah. Okay, when Eliezer heard about the curse on his father, he handed himself over to Abraham. He was righteous, and therefore he lives in paradise. Okay? So it's an interesting tradition as well that Eliezer was the son of Ham, who was cursed, but he doesn't leave his fate alone. He says, I don't want to live in this line of cursed people. I'm going to go to the best person I know, and I'm going to be his servant. And I don't know whether tshuva is the right term here, that he does tshuva, but one of the things we would see in a few of these characters here is also a piece of tshuva, a piece of changing, significant change. So we have two different traditions as to why Eliezer is one of those people. That's just the tradition, and you'll see that with all of the different characters, where they do give us a reason why. It's not the same reason in the two different texts. They're slightly different. Okay. By the way, because this guy, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, keeps showing up as, well, maybe, some say, maybe it was Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. And he's one of the other ones that we have a story. As I said, he was a very beloved scholar. And if you look down at the bottom, one version of the story here is he was perfectly righteous, and he was a friend of the angel of death. He was actually somebody who would sit with the lepers and with people with diseases, and he would try to heal them. So he was a really special person. And one day he said to the angel of death, show me paradise. Happily, the angel responded. As he went along with him, Rabbi Joshua said, I'm afraid of you. You might slay me without meaning to. If you like me and want me to come with you, hand me your knife. I'll hold it while we walk. Then you can courteously show me paradise while I view its chambers from the gates. Fine, said the angel, and he immediately took Rabbi Joshua to paradise. What did Rabbi Joshua do? He stood in the doorway of paradise and looked. Suddenly, he jumped into paradise, holding in his hand the knife of the angel of death, which he held for 7 years, until the Holy One said to him, Rabbi Joshua, the son of Levi, you have done a great deed. By taking the knife of the angel of death, what did Rabbi Joshua ben Levi do? Prevented death for 7 years. But God said, now return the knife to the angel of death, which is in itself an interesting text. This story is found in the Talmud. It is a classic rabbinic accepted, rabbinic text. Although in some of these stories, we get long explications about what he saw in heaven. And he also takes a trip to Gehinnom. And we get a lot of information about what he saw in Gehinnom as well. Why is he sort of a little bit questionable? I think because he's the one who decided he was going to paradise. There's no indication from, we don't know actually most of the stories how they get to paradise. But Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi kind of takes the step. It wasn't God's decision that he go. He did it himself. So I'm not quite sure, or that most of the rest of the characters are actually biblical characters. And I think if you look at the list, they're all from biblical sources, biblical times, and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is post-biblical. All right, so I don't know if that's why some of them aren't sure that he belongs in this list. What I want to do, so you can read these and you can find out who some of the characters are. There's a lot of controversy about the relationship with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Was it really Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, or did they really mean it's Rabban Gamliel, who had a servant named Tavi, who was a very famous Canaanite slave, but who Rabban Gamliel sat shiva for? It gets very complicated, and this is one of the places where we're working with manuscripts, early manuscripts, early traditions, and people apparently change stories, or change commas, or if you change your name because it didn't look right to you, because there's stories about the servant of somebody, but there's no stories about the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, or the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So on one hand, it's really interesting to try to figure out the differences, but some of these differences are probably issues of transmission. What I want to go ahead is look at the two characters on this list that may have, where we have textual evidence in the Torah or in the Bible that they may not have died. Okay, and the first is Enoch. So Sue, would you be up to reading on page 5? Turn to page 5. This is from Genesis chapter 5, and it's from that genealogy where somebody recognized Methuselah.
When Enoch had lived 65 years, he begot Methuselah. After the birth of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years, and he begot sons and daughters. All the days of Enoch came to 365 years. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, for God took him.
Okay, and Jonathan already alerted us to the fact that what does it say at the end of almost every other name in these genealogies? I left the Hebrew word there, right? Except it's kind of the first word there, Vayama. Okay, and they died, right? They begot children, they lived, they died. And what do we have with Enoch? Yeah, it's a really, really interesting, unusual set of phrases, which may predate, right? So there may be an older Enoch tradition, which may be Mesopotamian, may predate Jewish sources. But for many, many reasons, Enoch in these 3 volumes is one of the heroes. So in the Second Temple period and beyond that, he becomes one of the most important characters in that writing because of this strange phrase, right? That he walked with God. Who else walked with God?
No.
Right? So that concept of what does it mean to walk with God? Who are you? And then the Amen wasn't there anymore because God took him. Now you could say God took him. That means he died, right? But there's something unusual about Enoch. He is the shortest lifespan of all of those characters between Adam and Noah, he lives the shortest amount of time. So that opens up also all kinds of questions. And I brought you Bereshit Rabbah, which is a kind of a classic early rabbinic set of midrashim. And if you look at this, you'll see that whereas in these texts, Enoch is great. He's like good. He's like the best person that was ever there. He was, the flood wasn't going to come until after he died, right? The rabbis, the ones that we remember that are ours, these guys were ours too, by the way, okay? They're not so sure, okay? So they say Enoch walked with God and he was not, for God took him. And he was not, means that he was not inscribed in the roll of the righteous, but in the roll of the wicked, right? Rabbi Abba said he was a hypocrite. Sometimes he was righteous, sometimes he was wicked. Therefore, the Holy Blessed One said, well, he's righteous, I'm going to take him out. Okay, so there is this ambivalence of whether he was really all good or was he a little good and a little bad, and God did him a favor by taking him before he got worse, which is why his life was so short. Then we get this, again, the question of, and here the sectarians, some are those Judeo-Christians? Are they just different kinds of Jews? It's, it's not clear. Although in this case, it's a little later. So already at this point, Jewish Christians have both separated off. But Enoch becomes incredibly important in Christian theology. And so that question of did he die or didn't he die? Well, you're being a little picky here, the rabbi says, and his students say, yeah, you answered them well. And again, we have this question of Matron comes and asks Rabbi Jose, and we don't find death stated there. And he said to her, if it just said he walked with God and anything else, I would say he didn't die. But you know what? It says he's gone. God took him. That's language for death. So there's this debate in the rabbis, the classical rabbis that we follow. That's what they say about it. Okay. But for Jewish sources in this time period, and then for Christian sources, he becomes pretty amazing. There's a little, just because I could fit it in here, this small piece also from Rabbinic Fantasy is what Serach and Batya and have been doing, what they're doing up in heaven. And we don't have so many other descriptions for the other people except for Enoch and Elijah. So it's interesting. And this is from Kabbalistic material from the Zohar. All right. And the part that I didn't put on here, during the day, they teach stuff that women didn't normally learn. At night, the men who are in paradise come and the women who are in paradise come and they have a good time together and then they go back to their separate areas. That I didn't put on because it couldn't fit in the bed. Okay. It's really good. All right. So, yep, that's paradise. All right. So we're not going to read everything on page, whatever page we're on now, where it says the metamorphosis and employment of Enoch. But I wanted you to see it because I wanted you to see just how imaginative, I guess we could say, some of the material is here. And we have it in rabbinic literature as well, not just this non-rabbinic literature. But you can read it yourself, but you'll see here that it says he was first among men. God saw his righteousness and called down the angel to bring him up. And in this case, again, we get the fiery chariot that we're gonna know. We have a source for a lot, biblical source for Elijah, but Enoch goes also up in a fiery chariot. I love this. As soon as the chariot reached heaven, the angels caught the scent of a living human being and were ready to cast him out, for none among the living were permitted there, which is a similar theme to what happened to Moses. When Moses went up to heaven, the angels wanted him out, right? Living people aren't allowed here. But God says, no, he's here. And then you're gonna see Enoch gets lifted up and God puts his hand on it and Enoch turns into flame. He turns into an angel and we get this great description of 72 wings, 36 on each side. And he's as wide as the thing. And he becomes the angel Metatron. Okay. Who maybe is that the angel that for the Latter-day Saints? I'm not sure if he's their angel. But he sits on a throne of glory. Okay. And when at least some of the versions of when the four went up to paradise, Rabbi Akiva and Elisha ben Abuya and the other two, they see this angel on the throne next to God. And Elisha gets confused as to who is God and who is the angel. That's in rabbinic literature. And that's why he becomes Acher. That's why he becomes the one who turns away from Judaism. Because of this confusion between the angel and God, because they're both sitting on thrones right next to each other. Okay, so then I said, this stuff gets really crazy. It really does. Okay, but it shows up. Even though we lost this for a while because it was just in Ethiopian and we lost the Aramaic, but somehow there was a strain of that shows up in the top. Okay, so pieces of these stories remain. Right, so Enoch is a really interesting character who loses the power that he had for us, but retains it in Christianity.
Is this on page 6? Is this a Jewish source?
Yes. This is here. Okay, this is Second Temple and early rabbinic period literature, right? Which is one of the, as I said before, which is why Boyarin says that we were set up like everything was ready, and Jesus was the only one who kind of fit the pieces there. So there's a lot of stuff that we say that's Christian, except it wasn't. It was ours first. All right. And it's not the stuff that they told us that they told us in Hebrew school. It's the stuff that's really much more boundary things. Okay. We'll do a little bit of Elijah, and then we'll try to leave a few minutes to talk about what this might mean. Right. I gave you the whole kind of last chapter of Elijah's life. It's one of those things, we all know the story. Elijah went up in a chariot, but how many of us have read it recently or ever read it? Or read it in detail. So it's this beautiful story. We know, of course, Elisha, who was the Haftarah last week, Rosh Shabbos for Chaya Sarah. Elisha performs 2 miracles, including resurrection. Right, saving the boy, and Elijah also, his first mission involves reviving, if you will, so bringing somebody who is dead back to life. We think of it, we know the story for Elisha much better, but this pushing the boundary of life and death is part of their story, and bringing back from death. Is part of the story. So it gives this beautiful story because Elijah knows he's going to die. Elisha knows it too, and Elijah says, "Leave me alone, leave me alone." We know Elijah's always pushed people away. He hides he goes to the desert. He's in a cave, and this Elisha, his student, won't leave him alone. And there's a couple of times here. Elijah says, "Just leave me alone. Let me be alone." And Elisha says, "I'm not leaving you. I'm not leaving you." And they eventually get the prophets, the other prophets in that area know that this is happening. They say to Elisha, "We know your teacher's going to go," and he says, "Yeah, I know, but don't say it." Right? It's a really very moving story. They end up, the two of them end up crossing, making the sea part, or actually the Jordan part. And then if you look at verse, let's see where we are, verse 11, Elijah is, Elijah says, so what do you want from me? And he says, give me a double portion. Elisha says, if you see me, I'll give you the double portion. And it's not money or anything. It's, I want it to be obvious that I'm the one who inherits from. Okay. And while they're still talking, behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire and parted them one from another. And Eliyahu went up by a storm of wind into heaven. And Elisha saw it and he cried, my father, the chariots of Israel and the horsemen. And he saw him no more. And he took his own clothing and rent them in two pieces. He took up the mantle of Eliyahu and he goes back across the water, also splitting it like Elijah had. And they come to the other prophets, and the other prophets, say, well, I guess he's dead, but they don't know where his body is. And the other prophets say, well, we're going to go look. Maybe God picked him up and then dropped him on top of a mountain. And Elisha says, don't go, don't bother. And they insist, and he finally says, go. And they come back after a couple of visits and they say, we can't find a body. Okay. This is where we get the idea that Elijah didn't die, except that Elisha does Kriya. And this is one of those proof texts for Kriya, for tearing your clothing with the loss of, and it's the proof text for the loss of your teacher. That you do Kriya for the loss of a teacher as well, at least a major teacher. So it's an interesting, beautiful, provocative story, which really forms the basis for a lot of other how does people go up. It forms the basis probably for the Enoch stories, okay, because you'll see he goes up in the chariot of fire, but this is our primary text. The interesting thing with Elijah, and Danny Matt has a lot of it, is that Elijah is the one character that we have within the Bible itself, the idea that he's still here, right? And where do we find that? What's the proof text? No? It's a Haftarah we read on Shabbat Hagadol, before Pesach. We read the end of Malachi, where it says,
And there'll be the coming of Elijah.
I'll come, I will send Elijah, and Elijah will turn you one to another. So within the Bible itself, we have some idea that Elijah isn't God, okay? And that he still has this ability to go between worlds, right? Except for Serach, there's a possibility that Serach also goes between worlds, but it's not clear that she actually leaves. And the Serach story is that she's watching from heaven in the yeshiva, and they're talking about what it was like when the sea split, and she's looking down from heaven, and she says, I was there, this is what it's like. But she's not sitting in the yeshiva, she's watching the yeshiva. Eliyahu crosses those boundaries all the time. And this collection is taken from Tree of Souls by Howard Schwartz. And one of the nice things with that book is he gives you kind of often a compendium story, but he gives you all the sources. So here we have, and this is the question, so what happened? Well, Elijah also, just as we saw that Enoch became the angel through fire, okay? So Elijah was translated body and soul from this world to the world above, as it was said, the fiery chariot, okay? Nor did he ever taste death, but he was transformed into an angel. At that time, Elijah received a celestial body, which made it possible for him to ascend to heaven. But when he descends to earth on a mission, he resumes learning his terrestrial body, right? So you might have thought that in that going up in the chariot of fire, he lost his body, right? But he didn't. It still, somehow it survived that transition. And now we get, this lovely, what's the angel Elijah like? He's got giant wings and he can travel from one end of the world to the other. And no place is too far for him. And there's a debate. Was he was originally an angel? What angel is he now? But that's where we go. So what I want to know is what are we supposed to learn from this? From any of this? What are we supposed to think about from this collection of people?
Comes into my mind,
Uh-huh.
stories in Elijah, where, the rabbis are going to Rome. And they're told to look for Elijah, where will Elijah be when he's sitting on the bed, among the bed? And then there are other stories of looking for Elijah in different places.
Right, so he's always available, but Elijah is not the Mashiach,
No, it's Elijah.
right? They're two different people, but Elijah has a lot of jobs. This poor guy gets to work really, really hard. It was wonderful teachings, but what do we do with this? And are there commonalities among the characters?
I would say there's some commonalities, among a few during the king of Tyre and Bathsheba, daughter of Pharaoh, those two are, well, we clearly know that they're not Jewish, but they have some, and I could be wrong, but they have some major connection into as well. Oh, and Eliezer's the servant of Abraham. They were not a part of the Jewish community at that point where they did whatever it is they were doing. Eliezer brought Rebecca back so that Abraham's line could continue through Isaac. Bacha saved Moses, brought him out so he didn't drown in the river, no matter how good the bath was. And Hiram, king of Tyre, correct me if I'm wrong, but he supplied some materials for the building of the temple. So where sacrifices could be maintained in more, shall I say, regular
Right,
ways.
some of these characters make it possible, make things possible. But
By the status of he is Abraham's servant. Everybody in Abraham's circle is circumcised. And he had a special status. So I would consider him Jewish.
So, yeah. Although it's interesting that some of the Christians don't.
In Damascus.
Right, or when they imagined the two young men going with, for the Akedah, the two young servants, they say one of them was Ishmael, who's the father of the Muslims, and the other then is Eliezer, who becomes the father of the Christians. So the rabbis, I think you're right on the shot level, right? If all the men in Abraham's community got circumcised, then certainly Eliezer did. But this question of who's in, who's out, you don't have to be Jewish to go to heaven. That's a first teaching here, right? This is right. This is on the tradition that the righteous of all nations have a share in the world. Although, for the most part, the non-Jews in this collection help Jews. Okay. And they come from Africa, and they come from Asia, they come from all over. They're male and female, okay? Whatever the men are that change, Batya and Sarah are always there. They're young and they're old, they're rich and they're poor. So there's something interesting in that. What almost all of them have, either in the actual text that we know them from, or in the stories that are built around them, like from Jabez, is they are kind. They do kindness. They bring people together. They protect. They preserve, and or they do tshuva. Right? The Enoch did tshuva is one way of reading. So it is a, they're not Philistines, right? For the most part, some of them have some Torah here, but it's about relations. It's about interactions, not that studying Torah is bad, right? But remember, I told you that it's in the place in Midrash Kalarabati, right, in that Masachet, is here's how to be a good scholar. And by the way, if you really want to go to heaven, but again, it's what do we do with this? You want to go to heaven without dying. And that's not necessarily a goal, right? That's the other interesting piece. I don't think it's something that we strive for.
Metaphor, this idea of going to heaven without dying, it's really more about, not about literally dying or not, but what does your existence mean when people don't see you anymore? How would you matter? You're fine, not so much that you go somewhere or not go somewhere. I see it more like that, but it's more metaphorical. Because we don't even know what God made it or where it is, or what does that really mean? It's a theoretical construct.
One thing that's really interesting is that question of mortality and what does it mean to us? We're gonna finish up in a minute. The Midrash Devarim Rabbah imagines for about 40 pages Moses arguing with God about dying. And in the end, God says to Moshe, no matter what you do, there's a limit to your life. You are going to die. And although there's a few texts that sort of say, well, actually there's almost no text. He was buried, right? This body was buried, he died, okay? And even if there's a wish to say that Moses is waiting up there, he died. And yet we have this idea that could be otherwise. I don't know. I don't know what to totally do with it, but it's something interesting to think about. What does it mean for us to go beyond our mortality? And what do we do with our lives that make us eternal, even if it's just metaphorically? What are the stories people will tell about us? And what will they learn from us, and what will they want in terms of being inspired by us? So I hope you had fun. I hope you met some new characters and some new sources, and hopefully I'll see most of you in 2 weeks, and we'll learn about the Garden of Eden. Yeah.
When you're reading the same chorus, when Rabbi Joshua Ben Levi